to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I'm your host, Mark Gunn. The views expressed on this program are those of the host and guests and not necessarily reflective of anyone or any entity associated with this broadcast. This episode, a look at Black mental health and why we aren't getting the help we need. I want to personally thank everybody who has subscribed to the podcast, and remember, you can download it at markgunmedia.com, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Google Podcasts, envision-radio.com, or wherever you download your podcasts. I also want to thank those of you that listen from anywhere in the U.S. and around the world. Bonjour to our listeners in France. Guten Tag to those of you listening in Germany. To my friends in Ireland. Dia huich. Apa kabar Indonesia. Konnichiwa Japan. To my family in Nigeria. In Leo. Hello to my neighbors to the north in Canada. Hello Bangladesh. Hola to my friends in Brazil. G'day in Australia. And hello to those of you listening in the UK. We would love to hear from you, and you can reach out to us by going to our website at markgunmedia.com or through envision-radio.com. May is designated as Mental Health Awareness Month, and in light of every bit of trauma that Black people have been going through over the last few years, couple that with the historic trauma that we've dealt with over the last 400 years, the subject of Black mental health is coming back around. And just as with any form of medicine, there is a deep mistrust and stigma within the Black community. In order to get a better understanding, a little background is required.
It's hard enough to get mental health treatment in the U.S., but it's even harder if you're not white. Studies show that racial and ethnic minorities are significantly less likely to receive mental health treatment than whites. So we reached out to experts to find out why it's so hard for people of color to get help. The first thing is stigma. In other words, shame or disgrace that can make people feel excluded. Stigma is a big deal in the U.S., but especially in communities of color.
The Asian American community has high amounts of depression, anxiety, and other mental illnesses, just like every other community. Even when people might get connected to a healthcare provider, often the family doesn't understand. They feel like if it's known that their child is seeking help, that the family will be looked down upon.
Your cultural value, your cultural circle does not afford you the possibility of asking for help. Not being able to even verbalize that piece then leads people to very dark corners and very dark places. Depression, untreated depression in those cases oftentimes leads to suicidal ideation or drinking or substance use of some sort.
The second reason is a lack of cultural competence. Cultural competence is a doctor's ability to recognize the different places their patients are coming from and then be able to adapt to their needs.
Traditionally, African Americans will not come in and say, I'm depressed. They'll say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Fatigue is a real clear sign. So they'll not really even appreciate themselves that what they're experiencing is a mental disorder, because that's considered frailty. And frailty is something that's not really considered acceptable in a community that consists of mostly working people.
A person might be considered psychotic if they say they believe in ghosts, but this is a cultural belief. Sometimes it can rise to the level of a delusion, but sometimes it just has to be taken into account.
Not being sensitive to culture can lead to a wrong diagnosis, and that's happened. And it's led to a legacy of distrust. That distrust has included outright racism.
During times of slavery, African Americans, particularly African American women, were experimented upon in terms of OBGYN surgeries, and there's clear history of that. They were also subjected to an experiment called the Tuskegee experiment.
We're talking about a federally funded 40-year syphilis experiment that turned people into human lab rats without their knowledge. And by the way, that experiment didn't end until 1972. And for people who don't speak English, finding a therapist who speaks your language isn't easy.
On a national scale, the lack of mental health providers that speak other languages is large. Think about the areas of conflict right now, the Middle East. There's a lot of people coming from Syria. Who speaks Arabic fluently. When you think about people migrating from Africa, people from Ethiopia or Eritrea that are coming to the United States, there's, I don't know how many languages in India, not everybody speaks Hindi.
Finally, there's a lack of providers, and few mental health care providers of color, which could go a long way into tackling all the issues we just discussed. And while the Affordable Care Act has helped a lot of people gain access to treatment, who's filling all that demand? And if people have to wait for hours in line just to get treatment, which patients will fall through the cracks?
Once again, one of the barriers to Black people getting treatment is a lack of culturally competent doctors.
About a year ago, Cheryl Anscombe and Raheem Jackson were expecting a new baby. They had recently moved, and Cheryl switched jobs.
Can you describe how you were feeling?
Just really a lot of pressure, very heavy and fearful.
Anxious?
Very anxious.
She found a therapist in a suburb of Philadelphia who was white.
It felt like she just wasn't getting it, and I could tell it was from, the cultural differences, but I felt like I couldn't be myself in the session.
I could imagine, particularly white people, hearing that story and thinking, well, but it doesn't matter what color your skin is.
Yes, it does. And it's not necessarily a matter of the color of skin, it's more of the cultural backgrounds.
Raheem has found a similar disconnect in his 9-year recovery from alcohol and drugs.
I'd be in a meeting and I couldn't tell my story fully and honestly because I didn't want to offend the white people in the room.
Both tried to find Black therapists.
And I was wondering, where are all the Black therapists? Are they hiding underneath a rock?
I wanted a Black male therapist.
Could you find one?
I could not find one for my life.
In the U.S., just 4% of psychologists are Black and only 2% of psychiatrists, including Dr. Brandy Jackson in Chicago. She went to medical school only after traveling to Uganda and seeing Black doctors at work.
I believe strongly that it's impossible for us to really become something which we cannot first envision in our mind. And when we think of a doctor, we definitely don't default to thinking about a Black person.
Added to that, she says many in the Black community are raised to distrust psychological help. Black Americans are about half as likely as white Americans to use mental health services.
I think we still have a lot of reckoning to do in the Black community with regards to the stigma around mental illness. So when the time comes for those of us who are becoming doctors to pick a specialty, I think there's that extra layer there.
Are there enough people like you to go around?
I wish there were. I would. The unfortunate answer is no right now, but I'm an optimist.
Dr. Jackson's new website is designed to help draw more Black people into the field. Cheryl did eventually find a new therapist who's Black.
And it's been a day and night difference. She definitely understands my version of the struggle. Just working with her has been really beneficial for me.
Still a big issue when it comes to mental health and seeking therapy is the fact that Black men still rank rather low when it comes to getting the mental help that they need. Dr. Damon Twitty talks about why it's been so difficult for Black men to seek help.
Well, I think it's a couple things. If you think about sort of the history of African Americans in the United States, the narrative is often around overcoming adversity and oppression through faith and family and community. And if you contrast that with the mental health narrative, historically what we think about is something that's largely white, and it's more kind of sterile, focusing on individuals, not groups, and also catering to a more sort of wealthy sort of clientele. So you can see that there is this kind of a clash right there. When you think about the idea of a Black person sort of going to a stranger and sharing their, often who's white, and sharing their experiences, you can sort of see how that would pose a challenge for sure. And then when you talk about the aspect of being a male, you have to sort of superimpose the idea that there's a broader sort of idea about masculinity and being tough and manning up and not being weak. And so that's often accentuated among African Americans. And so you see that there's this sort of combination of both the racial side and then there's just the sort of being the male side. And so Black men sort of get that kind of perfect storm, if you will, that kind of can scare them from seeking mental health treatment.
Yeah, and it's especially unfortunate during these times because we know Black men are among those hit the hardest from coronavirus and the economic repercussions of this pandemic. So talk about why their mental health is more important than ever before.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to think about is that when we say physical health and mental health, we often just keep those as two separate things. And that's one of the problems I think that we continue to deal with both in medicine but also more broadly in society. Physical health certainly impacts mental health and vice versa. So if your mental health is adversely affected, that in turn will also impact your physical health. And so they're very intertwined. And as you said, Black people are often bearing the brunt of this virus in terms of a lot of early data is just suggesting this. I even recently read something in the Washington Post about my own hometown in Prince George's County, Maryland, talking about the disparities there. So it's also a very personal thing to me as well. But the two things are certainly very intertwined, physical health and mental health. So it's really important to attend to both in this time.
Yeah, and self-awareness isn't something that most of us possess at most times. So how do you know if your mental health is in jeopardy? What are some signs you should look out for?
Yeah, I mean, there are many things. So, I mean, significant changes in sleep patterns, eating patterns, being more irritable or withdrawn from people that you are close to. I mean, those are some of the more early red flags. And there are many other things as well that we can think about. As you mentioned, we're often not self-aware. So sometimes it involves listening to those who are close to us. Like, many people that I see, their wife or their sister, husband, whoever will say, you know what, you're not yourself, and you should come talk to someone about that. So I think that's also a big piece, being open to listening to those around you.
And it's not any easier for Black women. In fact, in quite a few cases, it's a lot worse.
To go through life and some of the stressors that you may experience as a Black person in America, you have to show a certain amount of strength. In the Black community, we reward strength, and then we have this limited view of what that means. Therapy is a strength. Crying and releasing it is a strength, because it's much easier to say, I don't want to deal with that. When you have to deal with the thing you want to avoid, that's strength. I'm at a point now where my mental health is not negotiable. I wasn't always taught to check in with yourself, see how you're feeling. What happens is that either you're going to learn healthy ways of coping, or it may be unhealthy ways. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia with my mom. I'm her only child, her best daughter. My father, we have a relationship, but most of my relationship throughout childhood was seeing him in a prison. In my neighborhood, in my family, I always knew I was going to college. Even as a first-generation college student, you take on that pressure, I have to do this. People have expectations of me. And then when you're starting to feel that separation between how people see me and what they want me to do, but I need help. I just started saying, maybe 2 years ago, don't call me a strong Black woman. Because I don't have to buy into that, but if you label me as that, you're not going to see me as a human. I felt the need to form Black Mental Wellness because there was a huge piece of mental health missing, and that was the mental health of Black people in America. So when you think about psychology, you think about the theories, you think about the approaches to therapy, it's all based on white people. What we know to be true is that Black people communicate differently. We have different stressors. And I think it's important to know this because trauma encodes itself in your body. And that stuff is passed down. The stressors and triggers that are unique to Black people in America is our whole existence in America, right? How do you show up? How is your hair? How are you dressed? That's so much stress, and that's not even the job. So when we think about the cultural shifts and changes, the last 2 years or so, it just seems like it's now the in thing to talk about mental health, and it's the in thing to talk about Black mental health. I feel like educated Black people, they like to say oh, my therapist said. Every time you say that, you're normalizing that experience for someone else. All of those things breaks down the stigma and opens it up for people. Actionable steps that I share, I like to think about the start of the day. Can you wake up, even if it's 10 minutes earlier, where you can just have that quiet time to yourself? Another actionable step, find at least 5 minutes, go outside and get some fresh air. Because we're spending so much time in our homes or in these enclosed spaces. So many people think that therapy and mental health is for people who are sick. And I want them to know that mental health and therapy is for everyone. There is a space for Black people as it pertains to therapy, and that there's something that we all can gain from being a part of it.
As was stated, one of the issues when it comes to Black mental health is that the whole science is based on whiteness. There's a cultural illiteracy when it comes to dealing with our specific issues. In short, Black mental health is not the same as white mental health.
When you look at the historical experience of African Americans in the United States, you have to start with the experience of slavery and the vestiges of slavery in terms of the trauma associated with it. And I think that Blacks continue to experience trauma in certain ways, and certainly with respect to those who live in urban communities that are infested with drugs or that are particularly violent. Those are traumatic situations that they experience on a daily basis. Certainly, as we've seen in recent events, interactions with the police can be, again, particularly traumatic. So when you talk about mental illness in the Black community, I think you have to begin with the experience of trauma and how trauma continues to abound in their experiences and in their daily lives. I think that what happens for a lot of individuals is that they suffer in silence with respect to having a mental illness. And so what I mean by that, in the greater society, there's certainly a lot of stigma associated with mental illness. It's sort of antithetical to the American ethic, which is to, be strong and courageous, to pull yourself up by the bootstrap, to weather the storm, etc. I think the second part of that, point is what's happening at the community level or the society level. And I think what happens is that within the Black community, I think that, again, that ethic about what it means to be strong and courageous is particularly pronounced because of trying to combat those forces like discrimination or racism, and it just adds to the burden of sort of what it means to survive. And so then the person who's struggling with the mental illness is perhaps not embraced or warmly accepted because of their struggles. I remember as a young person growing up, I used to hear about the person who was quote unquote sent down south. I used to wonder what that meant. And it wasn't until I got older that I became more knowledgeable of the fact that that person was struggling with a mental illness or perhaps substance abuse. From a historical perspective, there's been a lot of emphasis in the Black community, particularly in Black families, on keeping your problems close to the vest in the home. You don't share what's going on with outsiders. No one can treat you as best as your family can. You bring all your burdens and your problems to your family. And if you do take it to any entity outside of your family, it's the Black church. The church is really important in the Black community. Make no mistake about it. It's a source of sort of salvation and healing, and there's the whole collective support from you get from your fellow churchgoers and that sort of thing. But I think also what has historically happened is that the church has been defined as the place to sort of relieve your symptoms or to address your burdens, and so it stops there. And what I think needs to happen is that, first of all, I think pastors and lay ministers can be more trained in the signs and presentations of mental illness, but I think that the church could be sort of a triage unit, if you will, such that it identifies those who have needs, and it's that sort of first step and the sort of entree into care, but it shouldn't stop there. I believe that culturally competent care is critical to everything. If patients perceive that providers are inauthentic and do not care about their unique circumstances, then they're likely to be turned off. At a baseline, providers should understand the history of their neighborhoods, for example, or the history of the experience of African Americans and Latinos, such that they can put the clinical presentation into context and understand what unique factors are in play with respect to the clinical presentation and how that person is seeking to, survive and live in the world as an African American or a Latino. And so I think that the onus is on the provider to understand that context and to understand what it means for that person to live in that context.
As we continue to navigate the rather slippery slope of Black mental health, especially among Black men, there are several initiatives that are out and available to you. Everything from a barbers initiative to train more barbers in order to help Black men talk about their issues. And there's a campaign that I ran across that launched a couple of months ago called #IFeelSeen.
As I interact with, other people, different people from different backgrounds, having certain conversations with them and realizing like, okay, I'm not just, this messed up person in the head. Like, there's other people experiencing the same, same issues that I am as a Black man, just as a man in general.
The Black community constitutes 13% of the U.S. population. They are overrepresented in high-risk populations, which is a group that is often impacted by specific negative occurrences. For example, the Black community comprises approximately 40% of children in foster care systems, 40% of the homeless population, and 50% of the prison population.
I think that for a long time, especially growing up, like that was a place that you get away from your mom, you get away from your sisters. You didn't hear grown men talking and having a conversation that you may not always hear at your dinner table at home. Young Black men, even boys, spend a lot of time in the barbershop because they get their hair cut quite often. It's almost like barbers have become therapists in a way. And like a lot of guys, they talk to their barbers about what's happening in their lives. When you're in a barbershop, young man, you'll hear stories. And I think some folks in the generation before us that we looked up to oftentimes, conversation may not always been positive, in a positive light. And so I think that young men who saw that at an early age, they eventually grew up to become those men and have those same conversations.
A group of friends, and we find time to, we call ourselves the Adventure Crew. Now that COVID has come about and we can't really travel, we tend to explore our island. And during our exploration, we tend to talk. So we use our exploration time, whether it is a hike or on the beach or kayaking or something like that. We use that therapeutic time to talk about issues and encourage and support each other. So having that close-knit group of friends that worked in my favor to deal with different issues of mental health.
A lot of people also, especially Black men, we try to go until we just can't go no more. And so when we reach that breaking point, there's almost like a really bad explosion, and then we calm down. My friends, we would talk about surface level stuff, and then when we ask each other how we doing, is all we good? Or, if it's something slight is bothering us, like some business stuff, we'll talk about that, but it's never on a deeper level. And I feel like we should be able to feel comfortable talking more about what's really bothering us. But there's so many of us who just like, okay, I got this, I can do this by myself, that they don't want to tell nobody else because you might feel like they're gonna judge, you're gonna be judged or whatever.
When it comes to the topic of mental health, there really is no discussion that's being had, in a Caribbean household. I'm saying? I'm not saying every Caribbean household is the same, but as far as the norm, it's, practically non-existent. It's me, how we're taught to suppress things, how we're taught that, can't be too emotional, especially as a man. Like it just always blew me because I've always been, very in tune with my emotions. Like I express myself very well, and it's just something that wasn't normal to other people. And, even to my parents, sometimes they're, would say, "Oh, you're too emotional." You know what I'm saying? You're a boy, you're a man, like you're being too emotional about certain things. And I'm just trying to understand, what's really going on. I don't think I'm being overly emotional.
Here's the thing. We have been fighting a mental health battle since 1619. The generational trauma that's gone on from our ancestors to us is very real. Do not let anybody tell you any different. The difference now is we're becoming more aware of that generational trauma. And some of us are taking steps to deal with it. But it's going to take all of us because the resources aren't there, not to the degree that we need them. So it's going to be up to us to take care of us. As a matter of fact, this young man puts it in the best way possible at this given time.
All of my children of color in America, listen to this now. We are not okay. And it is okay to not be okay. If I am learning anything from watching Minnesota and the rest of America right now, it's that all of our ancestors that stayed nonviolent were heroes. The absolute fortitude it took to stand up for what you believed in and to have people disrespecting you in your face and not beat the crap out of them is godly. It is okay to scream. It is okay to punch a pillow. It is okay to be angry and rage. Your feelings are valid. Please be kind to yourself. You are in the pages of history now, my family, and history has its eyes on you.
You've been listening to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. The views expressed are those of the host and guests and not reflective of any business entity or anyone associated with this broadcast. If you have any comments or want more information on how to be a sponsor, log on to our website at markgunmedia.com or call us at 502-407-0283. That's 502-407-0283. Thank you for listening.
Mark Gunn Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.